10 years. That's how long we'd been married. A decade of shared meals, arguments over burnt toast, late-night road trips, and plans built one after the other like dominoes we never expected to fall. When Callista suggested a trip to Aspen to celebrate our anniversary, I thought maybe, just maybe, this was her way of telling me she wanted to fix things. The past year had been rocky. Distance crept in like a draft under a locked door. But people drift sometimes. I figured the mountains might bring us back together. Fresh snow. Crackling fires. Something real. I was wrong. That evening, we were seated at a rustic lodge with a panoramic view of the snow-covered pines. The table was dressed with white linen and golden candlelight. A bottle of red wine set open between us, half-finished. Callista had dressed in a dark green velvet dress, something elegant but effortless. Her laugh echoed a little too loud for the quiet room, especially when her cousin Jordan leaned in and whispered something. I caught the last word. Finally. They were both tipsy, cheeks flushed, but there was something else. Something rehearsed. I smiled, tried to hold on to the moment. The waiter placed a seared steak in front of me, rosemary dancing in the air. I just lifted my fork when Callista reached for her glass, swirled it lazily, and said it like it was the most normal thing in the world. By the way, she said, not even looking at me, I sold your cabin. My boyfriend needed the money. There was no build-up, no apology, no hesitation. She said it the way someone might say they'd changed the curtains. My fork stopped in midair. I looked up. I thought I had misheard her. But then Jordan snorted, wiping the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin. He'll get over it, she muttered, trying not to laugh. I looked at the two of them. Calm. Still. Like they had planned this moment. Like this was their punchline to some inside joke. My stomach twisted. Not from shock. That had passed in the first few seconds. What settled in was colder. Sharper. A silence inside me so loud it blocked out every sound in the room. I watched her lean back in her chair, satisfied with the drama she had caused, probably expecting some kind of reaction, rage, begging, disbelief. Something to show her she'd won. But I didn't give her that. Instead, I smiled. Not the kind you give when you're happy. No. This smile was colder than the ice clinking in her wine glass. That's funny, I said softly, reaching into the inside pocket of my coat. My fingers wrapped around a document I'd folded hours ago. Not because I expected this, but because I had stopped trusting her months before. Maybe even a year. Her eyes shifted to my hand as I pulled out the envelope. Slowly, calmly. I didn't even rush the moment. I placed it gently on the table, right beside her water glass, and slid it across the wood toward her with 2 fingers. Jordan leaned over to peek. Still smiling, still tipsy, until she saw what was inside. Deeds. Sale contracts. Authorization signatures. Callista's name. My name. Notarized. Dated. Final. She looked confused. What's that? She asked, her voice flat now. I leaned back in my chair, not even bothering to touch the steak anymore. I sold something too, I said simply. Callista reached out with a trembling hand. She pulled the document from the envelope and began to scan it. The blood drained from her face. You sold the account, she whispered. Her voice cracked on the last word. No, I corrected her, still smiling. I sold our joint investment account. The one I built for 10 years. The one you had access to, but never contributed to. You know the one, right? The account you borrowed against when you wanted that wellness retreat in Miami last spring. Jordan wasn't laughing anymore. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the leather booth. You can't do that, Callista said, but there wasn't much force behind it. I already did, I replied, my tone flat now. 3 days ago. Every dollar. Moved. Cashed. Redirected. It's done. Her face turned red, then pale, then red again. That's theft, she hissed. No, I said, eyes locked on hers. That's partnership. You know, the kind where one person does all the work and the other pretends to care. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. The silence that followed was so thick it swallowed the entire room. Even the waiter who had been approaching our table with a dessert menu took one look at us and turned back toward the kitchen. For a long moment, nobody said anything. I leaned forward just slightly, resting my elbows on the table, and studied the woman I once thought I'd grow old with. She looked nothing like the girl I met a decade ago. Or maybe she did, and I had just been too blind to see who she really was. Her lips parted again, probably to try and claw back some sort of power, but I cut her off. You sold my cabin, I said, my voice soft but controlled. Without my knowledge. Without my permission. And now you think you're still in control? I shook my head. You made your move, Callista. That was your mistake. Because now I get to make mine. Jordan finally found her voice. Look, this doesn't have to be ugly, eh? I raised my hand to stop her. You laughed, I said, my eyes never leaving Callista. When she told me what she did, you thought this was funny. Jordan looked away. I stood up. My chair scraped against the stone floor. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw anything. I didn't even take the documents back. I left them right there on the table like a calling card. A warning. A line drawn in granite. Callista stared up at me, still holding the papers. Her hands shaking slightly now. We can talk about this, she finally said, her voice barely audible. No, I replied. We're done talking. Then I turned and walked out of the restaurant. The cold aspen air hit me like a slap, but it was the kind of slap that wakes you up. I felt my breath freeze on impact, saw it cloud in front of me. I didn't look back. I didn't wait for her to follow, because I already knew she wouldn't. And that was the last moment I ever spent with her in a place we once called romantic. It wasn't a celebration. It was a funeral for everything we built, or thought we did. And the burial started with a single toast. A toast that burned everything. The drive down from Aspen was long and quiet. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't call anyone. I didn't even think about where I was going, not at first. My hands just stayed on the wheel. I was locked on the winding road that cut through the mountains like a scar. Snowflakes started falling around me. Light at first, then thick and fast. But I didn't stop. I needed distance. From the lodge. From Callista. From everything I thought I understood about my life. It was strange how numb I felt. Like my body was operating on autopilot while my mind sat quietly in the passenger seat. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt. Not yet. Those emotions were waiting somewhere ahead, biding their time. Right now, I was just hollow. I reached Denver close to midnight and pulled up outside Rory's place. He lived in an old brick building in the Five Points district, top floor, corner unit, the kind of space that smelled like espresso and ambition. I texted him before knocking, and the door opened almost immediately. Rory didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me, his dark eyes sharp, calculating, always reading between the lines. He'd been my closest friend since college, someone who understood things without needing them explained. He saw the way I looked, the silence in my face. He stepped aside and let me in. Spare rooms made up, he said as I walked past him. Whiskey's on the counter. I didn't go to the room. I went straight to the kitchen, poured myself a glass, and leaned against the island as the heat of the liquor moved through my chest. She sold the cabin, I said after a long silence. Rory raised an eyebrow. Wait, what? Sold it? Just like that. Said her boyfriend needed the money. He blinked. Wait, what boyfriend? I looked at him. Exactly. The words came slowly, like poison leaking from a wound. I told him everything. The dinner. The announcement. Jordan's laugh. The look on Callista's face when I slid the documents across the table. When I finished, Rory didn't speak right away. He walked over to the window, looked out at the dark city beyond, and folded his arms. That cabin was in your name, he said eventually. I know. She couldn't have sold it legally. She forged my signature. Rory turned back to face me. There was no shock on his face, just something colder. Focused. She's been planning this for a while, he said. You don't pull something like that overnight. She's been working on this behind your back. I nodded. Rory walked to his desk, picked up his laptop, and opened it. We're just getting started, he muttered, already typing. Tell me everything you still share. Accounts. Properties. Anything with both your names on it. It hit me then, not emotionally, but strategically. I had been living beside someone I thought I knew, while she had quietly built a plan to gut me from the inside out. The signs had been there. The sudden interest in our finances. The random trips. The coldness in her voice when she said, we're just in a rough patch. A rough patch, she called it. Meanwhile, she was funding a man I'd never met with money from my family's land. I sat across from Rory and began listing everything. The joint investment account. The Breckenridge condo. 2 vehicles. A safety deposit box. A wine membership. The art we collected over the years. Piece by piece, we laid it all out. And one by one, Rory began pulling up documents. She signed for the investment account as a joint owner? He asked. Yeah, 5 years ago. He tapped a few keys. You built that portfolio. She never added a cent. I know. He looked at me. We can use that. We worked until nearly 3 a.m. Rory pulling data. Me remembering details I tried to forget. I showed him old emails, login information, the lease agreements I still had copies of in my email archive. The wine burned in my veins, but my mind was clearer than it had been in months. At some point, I stopped seeing Callista's face as my wife. I started seeing her as a threat. Not emotional, not dramatic, just dangerous. Like a chess opponent who had made her move too early and assumed I wouldn't know how to respond. The next morning, Rory brewed strong coffee and handed me a plan. Literal bullet points on paper. Steps. Actions. A quiet strategy that would allow me to take back control of everything she thought she had won. You said you sold the investment account, he asked. I nodded. 3 days ago. Good. Then she's probably just realizing now that her safety net is gone. That money's been moved. All of it. He smiled faintly. Perfect. We use that panic. You're going to vanish from her world. No contact. No replies. No reaction. She's going to spiral, and we're going to watch her fall into the trap she set for you. He slid a new document across the table. What's this? I asked. An affidavit of ownership and investment contribution. We'll build your defense from the ground up. If this goes to court, we're going to make sure the record shows you built everything. She just signed the forms. I leaned back in my chair. The weight in my chest had shifted. Still heavy, but different now. Controlled. Focused. I didn't want revenge. Not the kind that comes with screaming matches or broken glass. I wanted truth. Exposure. For the world, and maybe even herself, to see exactly who she had become. And I wasn't going to say another word to her until I was ready. Later that day, I packed a small duffel and moved into the spare room. I didn't take much. Just clothes, my laptop, and a notebook. Everything else could wait. I needed to disappear for a while. Let her think I'd vanished. Let her wonder. I didn't answer her texts. I didn't return her calls. When she emailed asking where I was, I deleted it without reading past the first line. She didn't apologize. She didn't ask if I was okay. She said, we need to talk. She said, why are you acting like this? She said, you're being dramatic. And with every message, every attempt to spin her betrayal into something I was supposed to accept, I felt the cold steel of my resolve harden. She'd sold something that didn't belong to her. And now I was going to take back what did. Not with noise, not with threats, but with silence and precision. Because sometimes, the most powerful goodbye is the one you don't say at all. It started with a shoebox. One of those dusty ones shoved to the back of a closet, filled with paperwork you never expect to matter again. Inside were deed copies, title transfer receipts, and a faded black and white photo of me and my grandfather standing in front of the cabin in Montana, smiling, proud, alive. That cabin wasn't just property. It was memory. My grandfather built it by hand. Every nail, every beam, he taught me how to swing a hammer on that porch. He taught me how to patch a roof, chop wood, and listen to silence without needing to fill it. And now it was gone. I sat on the floor of Rory's guest room, documents spread out around me like a crime scene. Except I wasn't the victim, I was the investigator. The cabin had been in my family for 3 generations. After my grandfather passed, it was willed directly to me. I never co-signed anything with Callista. I never gave her access. And yet, she sold it. Sold my inheritance. The signature on the title transfer looked like mine at first glance. Same looping R, same lean in the letters. But the more I stared at it, the more the details fell apart. Rory confirmed it. It's a forgery, he said, holding the paper under a desk lamp. A decent one, but not good enough. We sent copies to a handwriting analyst the next morning. The report came back in 2 days. Highly probable forgery. That gave us leverage. But what came next turned leverage into firepower. Rory had a contact, someone who worked in financial forensics. With a few nudges and the right keywords, we began tracking Callista's digital footprints. Bank transfers. Travel receipts. VPN routes. It took less than a week to locate a pattern. $42,000. That's how much she got from selling the cabin. A cash buyer, no mortgage trail. The funds were transferred into one of our joint savings accounts, but they didn't sit there long. Within 48 hours, they were wired to an account in Florida under the name Tyrese Bennett. I didn't recognize the name at first, but when I searched it, along with Callista's email address, the picture filled in fast. Tyrese was a personal trainer based out of Miami. He ran a boutique gym that hadn't turned a profit in years. His social media was flooded with motivational quotes, shirtless selfies, and awkward live streams where he begged followers to sign up for training sessions. And in the middle of all that glittering desperation, I found her. Callista. In a video clip from 6 weeks earlier, she was standing behind him, laughing, clapping, hyping him up like they were a team. She had a baseball cap pulled low, sunglasses on, but I knew her. I knew that laugh, that voice. She wasn't hiding. She just didn't think I'd ever be looking. There it was, the reason she sold the cabin. The boyfriend Jordan joked about at the dinner table. He was real, and he was broke. Rory stared at the screen over my shoulder. "You're bankrolling this guy's pipe dream," he muttered. "No," I said, voice low, steady. "Not anymore." I kept digging. At night, while Rory worked on spreadsheets for his clients, I sat at the dining table piecing together timelines. Her trips, the cabin sale, the investments she made in that gym. I followed the paper trail like a hunter in the woods, each clue more absurd than the last. She had sent money under different transaction notes: wellness services, consulting fee, vendor payout, all carefully worded to look like legitimate business expenses. She wasn't just cheating, she was laundering. With Rory's help, I compiled a dossier: dates, screenshots, transfer confirmations, even a few blurry photos from Tyrese's Instagram showing her at events she had told me were girls-only yoga retreats. Every detail she lied about, every dollar she siphoned, every breadcrumb that led back to the man she thought I'd never find. One night, as I sat reviewing the documents again, Rory slid a manila envelope across the table. "Background check," he said. "On Tyrese. You're gonna want to sit down." I opened it. Tyrese had 2 prior arrests, one for fraud, one for identity theft. Both were sealed, but we knew enough people to get a summary. He'd scammed a woman out of her inheritance in 2015, promised her a business venture, disappeared with the cash. That woman had tried to press charges, but by the time police caught up, the money was gone and Tyrese had vanished. Charges dropped for insufficient evidence. Callista knew. She had to know. She wasn't stupid. She was calculating. Strategic. The woman I married was good with details, good with people, and better with lies than I ever gave her credit for. The worst part? She probably thought she was protecting him. Or maybe she thought she could control him. Maybe she was using me to control him. That's when it hit me. This wasn't an affair. It was a partnership. I wasn't dealing with a cheating spouse. I was dealing with a con team. A duo. She was the strategist, and he was the muscle. The smile. The sob story. She had helped him before. She'd helped him now. And unless I did something, they were going to walk away clean again. I sat back in my chair and stared at the wall. My hands trembled for the first time since Aspen. I thought about the nights she said she was working late. The weekends she claimed she needed space. All those mornings I'd made her coffee, kissed her forehead, told her to be safe, while she was stealing from me in broad daylight. Rory finally broke the silence. "You okay?" "No," I said, "but I know what I have to do now." I gathered the documents and began making digital copies. I labeled everything, created folders, cross-referenced timestamps. I didn't care how long it took. I was going to dismantle whatever illusion she had built around herself. I started drafting a formal complaint for the real estate board. The forged title transfer was step 1. That would buy time. I also began compiling an identity theft report because I had a gut feeling we weren't done discovering just how far she'd gone. Rory suggested we keep a low profile. No direct accusations. Not yet. We needed to make sure we were ahead of them legally before we went on the offensive. So I nodded. I agreed. But inside me, something was changing. There's a moment when a man stops trying to salvage something and starts preparing to destroy it instead. I'd hit that point, and there was no coming back. Because once someone steals your past, your family's legacy, your trust, your name, you stop trying to reason with them. You start making sure they'll never be able to do it again. And that's when the real war begins. The first thing I did was freeze the joint accounts. Every last one of them. I didn't announce it. I didn't send a warning. I just logged in early that morning, coffee still warm in my hand, and locked it all down. With a few clicks, I stripped away her access to everything we once built together. She probably didn't even notice right away. That was the beauty of silence. Let her keep spinning on autopilot. Let her swipe and swipe until the card stops working in the middle of some high-end boutique. I wanted her to feel the slow burn of confusion, the helplessness Years of careful investment, slowly grown into something solid. She'd never paid attention to them, never asked what I was doing when I stayed up late analyzing market trends. She just signed when I told her to. She thought that gave her ownership. But 6 months ago, she'd granted me power of attorney for emergency purposes. She never bothered to revoke it. Maybe she forgot. Maybe she thought I'd never use it. She was wrong. I sold everything. Cashed out just before a downturn. The timing was almost poetic. Transferred the funds to a private trust under a new entity name. She couldn't trace it, not directly. It wasn't hidden. It was just out of reach. Like everything else I was about to take back. The condo in Breckenridge came next. Our second home, or so we called it. In truth, it was hers in function, mine in finance. She had decorated it like a showroom. White furniture, abstract paintings, expensive rugs that nobody was allowed to step on. It was the one place where I felt like a guest in my own life. I found the documents buried in a folder on my external drive. A quick glance at the notarized page reminded me her signature had granted me full control in case of a financial emergency. I didn't hesitate. I listed the property. Quietly. Discreetly. A private buyer made an offer within 3 days. She didn't even get a notice until the transaction was finalized. By then, the proceeds were already split, and her portion was tied up in legal review. She sent her first message that night. Callista, hey, just saw something weird. Why are the Breckenridge utilities in someone else's name? No greeting. No, how are you? No remorse. I didn't reply. A few hours later came another message. Callista, did you move money from the brokerage account? My card got declined at Whole Foods. Still no apology. No acknowledgement of what she'd done. Then a third, angrier one. Callista, are you trying to punish me? Grow up, Liam. That one made me laugh out loud. She called me immature. After forging my signature. After selling my grandfather's cabin. After funneling money into a gym owned by a fraud with biceps for brains. She thought I was the one being petty? No, I wasn't being petty. I was being precise. She called the next morning. I watched the screen light up with her name. Didn't answer. Let it go to voicemail. Her voice was steady, too steady. Like someone rehearsing a script. Liam, I don't know what's going on, but I think we should talk. Maybe we both made mistakes. Let's not throw everything away over a misunderstanding. I deleted the message without finishing it. The truth was, I'd spent most of our marriage giving her the benefit of the doubt. Explaining away red flags. Telling myself she was just stressed, tired, distant. But now that I saw her clearly, the illusion was broken, and it couldn't be put back together. The silence on my end seemed to rattle her. She started sending longer emails. First pretending to care, then accusing, then bargaining. One day, I opened a particularly dramatic one. Subject, you're being cruel. Body, you can't just ghost me. You can't shut down everything like this. I'm still your wife. You owe me the courtesy of a conversation. But that's the thing. There was nothing left to talk about. She had told me everything I needed to know when she sold the cabin and laughed about it with her cousin. That wasn't a mistake. That was a declaration. And now, I was responding in kind. Rory kept tabs on the fallout. He tracked the bounced transactions, the flagged accounts, the growing trail of digital confusion she left behind as she tried to understand how the world was unraveling around her. Her financial confidence was crumbling. She couldn't play the role of the calm, in-control wife anymore. Not when her cards didn't work and her backup plan in Miami wasn't answering her calls. It was slow, intentional, like pulling a thread and watching the entire fabric fall apart. Meanwhile, I moved into a small loft downtown. Minimalist. Clean. No memories in the walls. I bought a second-hand couch, a steel table, and a mattress that didn't creak under the weight of someone else's lies. It wasn't home, but it was peace. And for the first time in years, I didn't wake up dreading the sound of someone else's footsteps. I changed my number, got a new bank, filed a request to monitor my credit for identity theft. I made myself invisible to her, not out of fear, but out of power. Let her wonder. Let her stew. Let her sit in the ruins of her own design and try to understand how it all fell apart so quickly. That was the irony she thought she could take from me without consequence. She thought I would scream, beg, cry. But I didn't do any of that. I didn't even curse her name. I just disappeared, took back what was mine, and left her with nothing but confusion. Because sometimes, the worst punishment isn't rage. It's indifference. And while she tried to piece together where I'd gone, who I'd spoken to, what I knew, I was already 10 steps ahead. With every quiet move I made, I reclaimed another part of myself that I hadn't even realized I'd lost. The money? That was one thing. But the silence? That was the real weapon. The knock came just after noon on a Thursday. I was in the kitchen of the loft, scraping burnt eggs out of a pan, still getting used to cooking only for myself. For a second, I thought it might be a delivery or maybe Rory stopping by, but something about the knock was different. 3 firm raps. Not hesitant, not rushed, just deliberate. I wiped my hands, walked over to the door, and opened it slowly. She stood there, shoulders squared, jaws set, eyes sharp. Not Callista. Someone else. A woman I'd never seen before, maybe in her late 30s. Dark hair tied back, plain jacket zipped to her throat, and a manila envelope clutched in her left hand like it was a weapon. "You don't know me," she said, before I could ask. "But I used to be married to Tyrese." That stopped me cold. My fingers tightened around the doorknob, and a dozen questions filled my head, but I said nothing. Just opened the door wider and stepped aside. She didn't even hesitate, walked right in like she belonged there. She looked around, gave a faint nod at the clean space, then turned to me and held up her phone. The screen lit up with photos, screenshots, documents, bank statements. Then she flipped open the envelope and laid more evidence on the counter like playing cards. "Your wife's doing to you what she and Tyrese did to me," she said. Word for word, move for move. Her name was Harper. And for the next hour, she laid it all out. She'd met Tyrese 6 years ago when he was trying to open a smoothie bar in Miami. He charmed her with big promises and big muscles. Said all he needed was a little financial support to get started. She was a nurse back then, worked long shifts, didn't have much, but she believed in him, gave him everything she could, cleared out savings, took out a small loan. He drained her dry. Then he brought Callista in first as a friend, then as business manager. Harper hadn't thought anything of it until one day, Tyrese changed the locks on the apartment, and Harper found out she wasn't just being left. She was being erased. "I couldn't prove anything," she said, voice flat. "They made it look like I was unstable, emotional. He told people I was obsessed with him. She backed it all up. They made me feel like I was the problem." I leaned against the counter, watching her. She wasn't crying. She wasn't here for pity. There was steel in her voice, strength built from scars. "I saw Callista in one of his new videos last month," she went on. I recognized the voice, the walk, and then I started seeing money transfers again. Names I didn't recognize. But yours came up in one of the filings, legal documents tied to a business account in Tampa. That's when I started digging. She pulled out a printout. It showed the name of a company I'd never heard of before, Tide Rise Wellness LLC. Registered under my name. Linked to my social security number. My address. I stared at the paper. "She used me to open this?" Harper nodded. "It's a front. They're laundering money through it. Mostly gym-related sales. Supplements. Memberships. But it's fake. I ran the numbers. The inventory doesn't match the deposits. And it's in your name, which means if the IRS ever gets involved, you're the one they're coming after." My mouth went dry. She wasn't just lying. She wasn't just cheating. She was setting me up. Harper crossed her arms, her eyes locking onto mine. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm not here to ask for anything. I just wanted you to know before it's too late." I swallowed hard, nodded slowly, then gestured toward the tiny table by the window. She sat. I poured us both water. My hands were still trembling. "How did you survive it?" I asked. She let out a bitter laugh. "Barely. Moved in with my sister. Filed bankruptcy. Took years to rebuild my credit. The only thing that kept me sane was knowing someone else would eventually see them for what they were. That someone, apparently, was me." We talked for another hour. She handed over everything. USB drive, documents, a timeline she had mapped out. I promised to stay in touch, and when she left, I just stood at the door for a while, listening to the silence. Then I got to work. I sent everything Harper gave me to Rory. 30 minutes later, he called. "This is worse than we thought," he said. "She used your name to file for a small business grant. There's government money tied to this. If that warehouse address is flagged, you're looking at federal charges." I didn't speak. He continued, "You need to file for identity theft now. Not tomorrow. Now, before this thing blows up in your face." I took a breath. Deep. Centered. Then I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I'll do it. And you'll need a lawyer," he added. "Not a regular one. A defense attorney. Someone who knows how to navigate federal investigations." "I'll find one," I said. "No," he replied. "I'll find one for you." I hung up and stood in the center of my loft, everything around me suddenly feeling smaller. Tighter. My life was becoming a noose, pulled tighter by the hands of someone I once loved. She'd taken my trust, my money, my cabin, and now she was trying to take my name. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about heartbreak anymore. This was about survival. I drove to a local precinct and filed the identity theft report myself. Took copies of everything. Sat with an officer for over an hour going through the forms. They took my statement. I handed over a copy of Harper's folder too. Then I contacted a federal attorney Rory recommended. A woman named Clarissa Vale. She was sharp, fast-talking, and didn't sugarcoat anything. "You're lucky," she said after our first call. "If Harper hadn't come forward, you might have found yourself facing real charges." "I'm not interested in lucky," I told her. "I want this done right." Clarissa began filing the paperwork immediately. She initiated the fraud alerts, contacted the IRS, and drafted a formal notice of dispute for any documents tied to Tiderise Wellness. Her tone never changed. Professional, surgical. She didn't care about the drama. She only cared about the facts. And the facts were damning. That night, I got one more email from Callista. Subject: "We need to talk before this gets worse." Body: "I know you're upset, but freezing the accounts, selling the condo, this is getting childish. I think we're both making mistakes. Let's meet." I didn't respond. She didn't know yet. She didn't know Harper had come, that the fraud was exposed, that the company she built with Tyrese was now under review by a federal defense team. And I wasn't going to tell her. Let her keep writing her story, because I was already writing the ending. And this time, she wouldn't be the one holding the pen. It was 6:47 a.m. when the first light crept through the blinds of my loft, drawing long lines across the floor like prison bars. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours, but I didn't feel tired. My mind was too sharp, too full, too awake. Harper's visit had changed everything. No more playing defense. It was time to move. Fast. Smart. Quiet. I called Rory before the sun had fully risen. He answered on the first ring. "It's time," I said. He didn't ask what I meant. He already knew. By 9 o'clock, I was sitting across from Leo Kramer in a quiet corner booth at an out-of-the-way cafe near the edge of town. He was ex-military, sharp-eyed, all muscle and calculation. Wore a plain black jacket and a silver watch that ticked louder than the espresso machine behind the counter. Rory had called in a favor. Said Leo was the best man to handle what came next. Leo took one look at the folder I slid across the table and raised an eyebrow. "Your wife forged documents, created a shell company under your name, and funneled money into it with a man who has a fraud record?" I nodded. He nodded back. "All right then. Let's dismantle their world. No drama. No posturing. Just cold focus." Exactly what I needed. Leo started with digital forensics. Within 48 hours, he tracked down the formation documents for Tiderise Wellness LLC. They were filed through an online business service that required minimal verification. Just a name, a social security number, and a mailing address. All of it in my name. But the IP address used to create the documents? That came from a hotel in Miami. 2 days after Callista's so-called retreat. She didn't even try to hide it. That's what stunned me most. The arrogance. The belief that I'd never look closely, never dig, never fight back. Maybe she thought I'd be too hurt to see clearly. Maybe she was counting on me to fall apart. But I didn't fall. I calculated. Leo kept digging. Within a week, he uncovered 6 separate transfers from our joint account to Tiderise, each labeled under different business justifications. Marketing budget, equipment order, contractor fee. And each one landed squarely in a checking account belonging to Tyrese. Not a business account, a personal one. Leo traced the money trail further. Crypto wallets, third-party payment processors, dummy vendors created to mimic legitimate wellness brands. It was a full-scale laundering system. Sloppy in some places, surgical in others. The IRS had already flagged one of the transactions in an internal audit, though nothing had come down the pipeline yet. "If this explodes," Leo said during one late-night call, "you're going to be caught in the blast unless we get ahead of it." I had already filed the identity theft report. Clarissa, my attorney, had submitted preliminary notices to the IRS, local authorities, and even the Florida Secretary of State's office. She was building a firewall, one document at a time. But we needed more. We needed proof that Callista was behind it, not just suspicion. That's when Leo found the address. The warehouse. Listed on the business registration was a small industrial unit on the outskirts of Tampa. I flew down the next day. Alone. The place looked like every other building on the strip. Concrete. Dull. With a metal roll-up door and a cracked parking lot. But inside was silence. Dust. A few empty shelves, a stack of unopened boxes labeled Fitness Blend Protein, and a fold-out table with a laptop that hadn't been used in weeks. Leo was already there when I arrived. He'd picked the lock earlier and was walking me through the space like a detective at a crime scene. "This is where it all lands," he said, pointing at a corkboard with faded sticky notes. Fake invoices, shell vendors, inventory that never existed. In a drawer beneath the table, we found receipts. Names I recognized, including my own. They were printing labels with my name on them, shipping supplements and fitness gear as owner-approved products. All fake, all traceable. "She wanted me to take the fall," I said out loud. Leo didn't respond. He didn't need to. I took photos, gathered copies. We logged the evidence and handed everything to Clarissa. She smiled for the first time since we'd met. "This is exactly what I needed," she said. "Now we make it official." By the end of the week, she had filed formal identity theft charges, requested a forensic audit of the business, and submitted evidence to the IRS and Florida Bureau of Financial Investigations. The paper trail we had gathered was tight, solid. It screamed intent, fraud, conspiracy. My name was on everything, but now so were her fingerprints. And still, Callista kept texting. "Callista, I heard you were in Florida. What are you doing? Callista, we can fix this, Liam. I just made some bad decisions. Callista, please, let's meet. I'll explain everything." I stared at the screen. She was unraveling, but I didn't answer. Instead, I forwarded the messages to Clarissa. "She's going to try to talk her way out," I told her. "She'll have her chance," Clarissa replied. In court, 2 days later, we got confirmation. The IRS had launched a formal inquiry into Tide Rise Wellness. They called me in for a statement. Clarissa handled everything. By the time we were done, I was listed as a cooperating victim in a federal fraud case. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was preparing to press charges. Tyrese, still unaware of how close the storm was, posted a video on social media the next morning. He was standing in the gym, sweaty, smiling, arms wide like he was about to deliver a sermon. I watched him talk about loyalty and vision while standing in the ruins of what was soon to be his downfall. And in the background, I saw her, Callista, off to the side, barely visible, wearing sunglasses indoors, like always. I didn't feel pain when I saw her. I didn't feel rage. What I felt was quiet, the kind of silence that comes after a long storm. The kind that tells you the sky's about to clear, and what's left standing after the wind dies down is what really matters. I turned off the video and opened my laptop. Leo had sent the final piece of the puzzle. A time-stamped login, the business bank account, IP matched to her apartment, and the transaction memo, reimbursement for consultation, CL, her initials. It was over. I knew it. Rory knew it. Leo knew it. All that was left was for her to know it too. I sent the evidence package to Clarissa. She called back within the hour. "This is it," she said. "We've got her." And for the first time in months, I exhaled. Not in relief, but in preparation. Because the next time I saw Callista, it wouldn't be at a table, or a dinner, or a therapy session. It would be in court. And this time, the setup wouldn't be hers. It would be mine. The envelope was thick when it landed in my mailbox. Cream-colored. Heavy. Official. The kind of envelope that doesn't bring birthday cards or thank you notes. Clarissa had warned me I might get one, but seeing it with my name stamped in bold across the front still sent a chill through me. I brought it inside, set it on the table, and just stared at it for a moment. It wasn't a surprise, but it still felt like a punch. Inside was a civil lawsuit, filed by Callista. She was suing me for misappropriation of marital funds. According to the paperwork, I had intentionally withdrawn and concealed assets from our shared accounts, leaving her financially stranded and emotionally traumatized. The words jumped off the page like spit in my face. She was trying to flip the script, to make me the villain in the story she wrote with her lies and forged documents. I sat back, the paper still in my hands, trying to understand the logic behind it. She had stolen from me, betrayed me, and nearly got me federally indicted. And now she was accusing me of financial abuse. "She's cornered," she said immediately. "This is desperation disguised as offense. She's trying to get ahead of the charges?" "Exactly. If she can frame you as the aggressor, she might negotiate leniency, or at least stall the investigation." That settled something deep inside me. She was scared. She knew what was coming. In this lawsuit, it was her way of trying to throw sand in my eyes before the final blow landed. I want to counter, I said. We will, Clarissa replied. But first, we prepare. And that's what we did. Over the next few weeks, I worked with Clarissa and Rory to gather everything. Every bank statement, every email, every signed document. Leo was relentless. He found old chat logs, VPN records, and flagged IP addresses linked to Callista's devices. He mapped out her digital trail like a forensic artist sketching a suspect's face. But the most damning piece came from Harper. She had kept everything. Voice memos from Tyrese, screenshots of group chats where Callista coached him on what to say, even copies of a Google Doc where they laid out a target profile, descriptions of financially stable partners they could exploit. My name was at the top of one of the lists. Liam D., it read, owns cabin, multiple investment accounts, passive, predictable, too nice. That last word, nice, nearly made me laugh. Because nice was gone now. Clarissa compiled everything into what she called the betrayal files. It was a binder, 3 inches thick, tabbed by date, category, and relevance. Every forged document, every unauthorized transaction, every digital breadcrumb that led back to her and Tyrese. You know what the best part is? Clarissa said during our final prep meeting. She's going to walk into that courtroom thinking this is about a marriage. I raised an eyebrow. And it's not. No, she said. It's about a conspiracy. The day of the hearing, I arrived in a dark suit. Nothing flashy. Just clean and silent. Rory stood beside me, calm and unreadable. Clarissa was already inside, setting up the exhibits. The courtroom smelled like paper and dust. Rows of wooden benches. A judge's bench that looked like it had seen decades of lies. Callista arrived 10 minutes late. She walked in like she was the victim in a film. Hair pulled into a perfect bun, white blouse tucked into a skirt too formal for the occasion. She glanced at me, smiled faintly. The kind of smile that's meant to disarm, as if we were still something that could be fixed. I didn't return it. Her lawyer looked younger than her. Nervous. Kept checking his notes, glancing my way like he was hoping I'd slip and confirm something with a twitch of my face. The judge entered. Everyone stood. The bailiff called the case. And then it began. Her attorney started with the expected, claiming financial abandonment, emotional hardship, and the classic phrase, intent to conceal. I listened without blinking. Let him paint his picture. Let him try to cast shadows where the truth stood tall. Then it was our turn. Clarissa stood slowly. No theatrics. No raised voice. Just clarity. She presented the forged cabin sale first. Laid out the deed, my original signature, and the expert testimony on the forgery. Then she walked the judge through the financials, the shell company, the withdrawals, the digital fingerprints. She introduced Harper's affidavit, then Leo's, then mine. For every accusation Callista had made, we presented a wall of evidence that didn't just defend me, it exposed her. The courtroom stayed quiet. Even Callista's lawyer looked like he was reconsidering his life choices. When it came time for Callista to take the stand, she hesitated. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone. She tried to cry, said she was confused, that she trusted the wrong people, that Tyrese had misled her, that she didn't know what she was signing. But Clarissa was ready. She pulled out the group chat logs, the draft messages, the audio files, and when she showed the target list, with my name at the top, the silence in the room shifted. It wasn't sympathy anymore. It was realization, disgust. The judge leaned back, steepling his fingers. He looked at Callista, then at her lawyer. I find the plaintiff's claims not only unsubstantiated, he said slowly, but intentionally misleading. This case is dismissed. With prejudice. Callista's mouth opened. But he wasn't done. Additionally, given the evidence presented today, I am referring this matter to the state attorney's office and the Department of Revenue for further investigation. Bailiff, please escort Ms. Duval to the holding area. She is not to leave the premises until interviewed by the attending agents. It happened fast. 2 plainclothes agents entered from the rear of the courtroom. One approached Callista gently. The other reached into his coat and handed her a document. Her hands shook as she read it. The color drained from her face. It was a formal notice. Charges, wire fraud, identity theft, tax evasion, conspiracy to defraud. She turned to me, her eyes wide, lips trembling. Liam, please, don't let them. But I didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't say a word. She was still calling my name as they walked her out. 2 days later, Tyrese was arrested outside a strip mall gym in Miami. He went quietly. No speech. No video this time. And just like that, the empire they'd built on lies and fake promises crumbled. Not with fire. Not with violence. But with the one thing they never expected. Evidence. It should have felt like victory. When the agents led Callista out of that courtroom, her hands trembling, her voice stammering some version of please that had lost all weight, I thought I'd feel a sense of closure. Justice. Relief. But instead, what settled over me was something heavier. Not grief. Not guilt. Just a strange stillness. Like standing in a house after a fire, surrounded by ashes you didn't set, but still have to clean up. Rory met me outside the courthouse. He didn't say much, just clapped a hand on my shoulder and nodded. I nodded back. That was enough. Clarissa walked out a few minutes later, binder in hand, her expression unreadable. She'll be held for questioning, she said. Depending on how honest she is, we'll know whether this stays state level or moves federal. My bet. They're going to make an example out of both of them. I raised an eyebrow. Both. Tyrese is already in custody, she replied. Florida Bureau arrested him this morning. We filed the supporting documentation to link him directly to the transactions under Tiderise. And between Harper's affidavit, Leo's data, and the shell company trail, it's not a question of if, it's when. I didn't smile. I just nodded again. It wasn't over. Not really. Because while the courtroom was behind me, the consequences weren't. A few days later, Clarissa called me with an update. Remember that business grant? She asked. The one they filed in my name? Yep. Turns out the state approved a partial disbursement. $18,000. Which means, I'm liable, I finished. She paused. Technically, yes. Until the court finalizes the fraud claim and shifts responsibility to her. But that process can take months. Maybe a year. I sank into the couch in the loft, staring at the bare wall across from me. I'd spent so long exposing the truth, proving she'd stolen from me, lied to me, used me. But that didn't erase the damage. It didn't cancel the debt. How much? I asked. $14,200, she said. That's your share under joint marital liability. Because you were still legally married when the form was signed. I closed my eyes. Of course, there's always something left behind. Always a piece of the fire that keeps burning long after the smoke clears. I'll pay it, I said quietly. Liam, we can contest it. No, I said. Let it be the last thing I pay for her. Ever. There was a silence on the line. Then she exhaled. All right, I'll send the transfer details. After I hung up, I sat there in the quiet for a long time. $14,000. It wasn't just money. It was the final price of my silence. My trust. My 10 years of looking the other way while something rotten grew right in front of me. I transferred the money that night. No hesitation. It felt like pulling a splinter from my soul. Later, I met Rory for drinks. We sat at a rooftop bar overlooking the city. Just two men who'd seen too much and said too little. He didn't toast to justice or say told you so. He just listened. You're free now, he said. I shook my head. Not yet, but I'm getting close. The next morning, Leo called. I thought you might want this, he said. He sent over a compiled report, final logs, court filings, the full list of transactions from Tiderise under both Tyrese's and Callista's names. The last entry on the list? A payment labeled Cabin Flood Claim Reimbursement, CD. What is this? I asked. She filed an insurance claim after the cabin sale, Leo said. Claimed it had been damaged during a storm. The cabin wasn't damaged, Liam. She flooded it, intentionally. Probably to make the buyer drop the price or to cover something up. I stared at the report. She vandalized my grandfather's cabin? Leo's voice lowered. She desecrated it. It was the first time I felt true anger in weeks. Not the cold kind. Not the calculating kind. This was raw. Ugly. The cabin wasn't just wood and stone. It was family. Legacy. And she destroyed it like it was disposable. I thought of that old black and white photo of me and my grandfather. Us standing in front of that porch, two proud smiles, a whole future ahead. And now, that future had been sold, flooded, claimed, and erased. I didn't cry, but I came close. I spent the rest of the week wrapping things up, closing accounts, canceling shared services, returning legal documents to Clarissa for archiving. With every box checked, I felt something loosen in my chest. Bit by bit, I was untying the knot she'd tied around my life. Then, one morning, I woke up and realized there was nothing left of her here. No photographs. No clothes. No lingering scent of her shampoo in the bathroom. She was gone. Not just physically, but in every way that mattered. Except the debt. The debt had stayed, but I didn't resent it anymore. It was a scar now. A mark of survival. Of clarity. Leo sent me one last message before signing off. "This is the part they never talk about," he said. The scar tissue. He was right. People love revenge stories. The drama. The downfall. But nobody talks about what happens after. The silence. The paperwork. The therapy. The rebuilding. The small, slow moments of putting yourself back together piece by jagged piece. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stood by the window. It was raining, but I didn't feel cold. I felt clean. Harper called that evening, just to check in. She said she'd heard about the court outcome, about the charges. She sounded steadier than before, stronger, like someone who'd been through fire and learned how to live with the burns. "They'll go down for this," she said. "Eventually." I nodded. "They already have." There was a pause. Then she asked, softly, "So, what are you going to do next?" I looked around the loft. The clean counters. The empty walls. The life I had pressed reset on. "I'm going to start over," I said. Simple as that. Not in a movie montage kind of way. Not with grand speeches or perfect endings. Just quietly. Honestly. One step at a time. Because I didn't want revenge anymore. I wanted peace. And I was finally ready to find it. You think once the fire is out, you can breathe again. That after the final blow, the last courtroom appearance, the evidence, the cold click of justice, there's nothing left to burn. But that's not always true. Because some debts don't go away. Some stay, wrapped in fine print and forgotten clauses, just waiting to remind you that even freedom has a price tag. It was a letter this time. Plain envelope. No warning. No apology. Just my name printed at the top and a polite request for payment at the bottom. I sat at the kitchen table holding it between my fingers like it might bite. $14,200. I'd already known about the amount. Clarissa had explained it clearly after the courtroom chaos faded. It came from a refinancing document I signed 3 years ago, back when I was still trying to save a marriage that had already quietly packed its bags. Callista had slipped it in during a long stack of papers. We were consolidating debt, she said, lowering interest rates, making things easier. I hadn't read every word. That was my mistake. Buried deep inside was a clause linking me, jointly and legally, to a business loan. One that was now tied to the fraudulent company Tiderise Wellness. And even though she was the one who opened the account, used the funds, and forged the operations behind it, the debt was still real. And because we were married when it was created, I was liable. The legal process would shift the blame in time. The fraud report, the testimony, the criminal investigation, it would all work in my favor eventually. But eventually wasn't now. And the creditors? They didn't care who faked what. They just wanted their money. I ran my thumb across the edge of the letter and looked around the room. The loft was quiet, as always. Sparse, clean, small. It had no memories in the walls, which I liked. But that morning, it felt tighter. Like the walls were leaning in again. Like I was being reminded that even after all I'd done, the exposure, the silence, the plan, there were still remnants of her tangled in my life. I thought about fighting it, about dragging it into another legal battle. But something inside me said no. No more courtrooms. No more dragging this out. I was done bleeding for her decisions. So I paid it. Quietly. Without ceremony. I walked to the bank, withdrew from my personal savings, and wired the money. The teller gave me a printed receipt. I folded it and slipped it into a drawer without reading it twice. That was the last thread. The last dollar. The final consequence of a marriage built on lies. Afterward, I walked to the park down the street. It was a cold day, gray sky, scattered leaves, the kind of afternoon that kept most people indoors. But I needed to be outside, to feel the wind against my face, to remind myself I was still here, still standing. I sat on a bench overlooking a small man-made pond and let my thoughts settle. They didn't race like they used to. No more what-ifs. No more flashes of Callista's voice echoing in my ears. Just space. Silence. Scar tissue. Leo had been right. Nobody talks about this part. The part where you're free, but still feel a little broken. The part where you win, but still have to pay. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the last messages I had saved from Clarissa. Most were logistics, case updates, file transfers, closing memos. But the last one was different. "Clarissa, You handled this with more grace than most people would. You walked away without destroying yourself to destroy her. That's rare. I hadn't replied, but I'd read that line over and over, because she was right, and also wrong. I didn't walk away unscathed. I was still rebuilding from ashes, but I'd chosen not to be like Callista. I hadn't forged anything. I hadn't used someone else's name, heart, or credit score to fill a hole inside me. I'd responded with truth, with facts, with quiet resolve. And that, to me, meant more than revenge ever could. After sitting there a while, I pulled out my notebook, the one I'd carried since the day I left Aspen. Inside were notes from the early days of unraveling everything. Account numbers, password resets, legal steps. But further back, buried behind the battle plans, were scribbles of something different. Ideas for a new beginning. Dreams I'd paused. Projects I'd buried. Before Callista, I used to sketch ideas for a small retreat center. Nothing fancy. Just a quiet place tucked in the trees, somewhere people could disconnect, breathe, find peace. I flipped to the page where I'd drawn a rough floor plan. Cabin-style rooms. A shared kitchen. Walking trails. Fire pits under the stars. I hadn't looked at that page in years. But now it didn't feel impossible anymore. A few days later, I drove to the edge of the city and met with a realtor. I told her I was looking for land. Somewhere remote. With trees. With silence. She showed me 3 properties. The first 2 were beautiful, but the third, it felt, right? It was just a clearing, really. A few acres tucked behind a long stretch of pine trees. A creek ran along the edge. No structures, just earth. But when I stepped out of the car and stood there, breathing in the cold mountain air, something inside me settled. It wasn't the old cabin. I'd never get that back. But this could be mine. Truly mine. I put in an offer. A week later, it was accepted. I didn't tell anyone at first. Not Rory. Not Leo. Not even Harper, who had become a quiet presence in my life. Someone I met for coffee every few weeks, always talking about anything except the past. But the day I signed the final paperwork, I sent her a photo of the land. No caption. Just the image. She replied with a single word. Freedom. And that's what it felt like. Not escape. Not revenge. But peace. I visited the land every weekend, sometimes just to walk the edge of the creek, sometimes to sit on a folding chair with a thermos of coffee and listen to the wind. I started sketching again. Plans. Possibilities. I didn't know how long it would take to build something, or even if I would, but the idea lived again, and that was enough. One night, as I sat by the water under a sky full of stars, I took out that notebook again. I flipped to a blank page and wrote something I hadn't dared to say aloud. She took the past, but she couldn't take the future. That's mine. The cabin was gone. The one my grandfather built with his bare hands, the one where I learned how to split firewood, where we played cards by lantern light when storms knocked out the power. Callista had taken it, sold it, flooded it, and buried it under a claim. And as much as I wanted to believe I could one day get it back, I knew deep down it was never coming home. But not everything has to. Some things are meant to stay in the past, anchored to who we were before the fire came through. I stood on the porch of the new place, a quiet stretch of forest near Flathead Lake. It was still unfinished. The siding wasn't painted yet, and there was a stack of cedar planks leaning against the east wall waiting to become a deck. But it was mine, completely. Not co-signed, not borrowed, not attached to someone else's name or expectations. Mine. There was no grand celebration when I bought it. No Instagram post. No champagne pop. Just a signed deed, a quiet exhale, and a long drive through winding roads that didn't lead back to anything but peace. Most mornings, I woke up before sunrise and sat on the unfinished steps with a mug of black coffee. Just me and the sound of birds figuring out the day. No alarms. No schedules. No one asking for anything. The quiet didn't feel empty, it felt earned. Harper lived 2 towns over now. After the trials and courtrooms and long months of sorting through the aftermath, she decided she needed space, too. Not away from me, but away from the memory of what had happened. We never tried to force something romantic between us. That wasn't what we needed. What we shared was something different. A bond forged in betrayal, in survival, in understanding without explanation. We met up sometimes, usually at the local cafe that served thick toast and terrible D. The silence said enough. One day, she brought a rescue dog, some kind of shepherd mix with a crooked tail and soft eyes. I sat on the ground while he sniffed me like I was a puzzle. You should get one, she said, sipping her tea. Maybe, I replied, rubbing the dog's ears. Dogs are honest, she added. They're either happy to see you or they're not. No pretending. That made me laugh. And it stuck with me. Later that week, I adopted a black lab mix from the shelter. They called him Diesel. He was all legs and tongue and had a bark too big for his skinny frame. He followed me everywhere, as if he was afraid I might vanish if he blinked. He liked to nap on my boots and howl at distant owls like they owed him money. He made the cabin feel full. I started writing again. Not stories. Not letters. Just thoughts. I filled notebooks with memories I didn't want to lose. Good ones, like the first time I caught a fish with Grandpa or the way the cabin used to smell in winter. I didn't write about Callista. Not directly. But she showed up anyway in the quiet between sentences and the things I was learning to let go. One evening, I checked the mailbox at the end of the gravel drive and found a letter with no return address. I almost threw it away, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Thick, expensive. The handwriting was neat, unmistakably hers. You always thought you were smarter, but I was just faster. That was it. No apology. No regret. No ownership. Just a line that stank of pride and denial. Like she still believed she'd won something. I read it twice. Then once more, slower. And then I smiled. Not because it hurt, but because it didn't. There was a time that letter would have ruined my whole day. Would have sent me into a spiral of anger or doubt. But now, it was just a whisper from a world I no longer lived in. A small reminder of who she was and who I no longer had to be. I didn't reply. I burned it. Right there in the fire pit out back. Diesel sat beside me, watching the flames crackle and curl the paper into ash. Then I stood up, stretched, and walked inside. A few days later, I got a message from Rory. Just checking in. He said he'd heard through one of his legal contacts that Tyrese had taken a plea deal. 5 years minimum. Callista's trial was still pending. There were new charges. Something about misusing federal grant money and falsifying identity records across state lines. I didn't ask for details. I didn't want them. That part of my life was over. And I wasn't going to keep dragging its ghost into my present. I spent that weekend building the deck out back. It was slow work, measuring, leveling, hammering boards while Diesel chased bugs and barked at passing clouds. But it felt good. Honest. Every nail was a little reclaiming. Every board a little reminder that I was building something real now. Something no one could forge or flood or take away. That Sunday, Harper stopped by. She brought a peach pie and 2 mugs from the cafe. We sat on the half-finished deck and watched the sun sink below the trees, the sky burning soft orange and pale purple. She pointed at the horizon. You know what I like about this place? She asked. What's that? It's quiet, she said. But not empty. That summed it up better than I ever could. We didn't say much after that. Just let the quiet stretch between us like a bridge. Later, after she left, I sat by the fire pit again. Diesel curled up at my feet. The stars came out one by one, soft and slow, like they were in no rush to impress. And I finally said it out loud. You were fast, I whispered to the night, to the memory of Callista. But I'm free. And that, I realized, was the difference. She ran from truth, hid behind lies, cut corners and build illusions and moved through life like she was always one step from exposure. She might have been faster, louder, sharper with her tongue, but I was whole now. And wholeness isn't about speed. It's about stillness, about choosing peace over war, integrity over spectacle, healing over revenge. The cabin may have been sold, flooded, and lost, but the one in my mind, the one built from memory, forged in fire, and rebuilt in silence, still stood. And this one? No one would ever touch again. My name is Silas Merrick, and I've been married to Maribel for 17 years. That's a long time. Long enough for habits to become patterns and patterns to harden into silence. We had our routines, coffee in the morning, separate Netflix queues at night. Not cold exactly, just cooled. We had a life built like a porch swing, familiar creaks, some frayed ropes, but still hanging. That Saturday morning was like most others. I pattered into the kitchen in my robe and socks, the kind with worn heels and one stubborn hole near the toe. The coffee machine sputtered behind me, spitting steam into the quiet as if protesting its own job. Outside, the lawn glittered with dew, and the old sprinkler ticked away like it had its own language. Peaceful, forgettable, even, until I saw the photo. I wasn't even looking for it, just thumbing through my phone while waiting for the brew to finish, tapping through notifications with sleepy indifference. And then Facebook served it to me, right there at the top of my feed, like it couldn't wait. Maribel, my wife. Her smile framed in soft office lighting, standing way too close to Trent. Trent, the work husband. The guy she joked about. The one she claimed made boring Zoom calls bearable. He's harmless, she once said, rolling her eyes. You're not really jealous, are you? There he was, his arm casually slung around her shoulders like he'd done it 100 times. Her head tilted in, her eyes half closed, lips parted mid-laugh like the camera had caught them in the middle of something private. Something soft. Something mine. The caption underneath was the real punch. My real partner. Hashtag #WorkHusband for life. My thumb hovered. I didn't blink. My heart didn't pound. There was no cinematic gasp or sudden tremble in my hands. Just a slow, mechanical emptiness spreading through my ribs. Like someone had opened a hatch in my chest and quietly vacuumed the air out. No panic. No shouting. Just a clean, sharp line slicing through 17 years. I walked back toward the counter, the coffee now finished, filling the air with a scent that suddenly meant nothing. I poured the mug like I always did, black with a splash of oat milk. The steam curled up toward my face, but I didn't sip. Instead, I opened the side drawer, the one beneath the toaster where we kept things too awkward to categorize. Batteries, screwdrivers, a broken pair of sunglasses. In the beige folder. I had printed the papers weeks ago. That part of me, some quiet, doubting part, must have known. There had been signs. The extra hours. The polished replies. The way she turned her phone screen down when I walked into the room. Little things, like breadcrumbs left not to guide me, but to see if I'd follow. I placed the folder on the kitchen table, right where she usually dropped her purse. The light through the window hit it perfectly, like a spotlight. No note. No dramatic flourish. Just the facts, waiting. Then I walked back to the counter and picked up my phone. My fingers didn't hesitate. No trembling. No edits. I opened Facebook, tapped into the comment box beneath her photo, and typed, "Congratulations. The divorce papers are on the kitchen table." I hit post. No second guessing. No drafts. A small bubble of adrenaline rose in me. Not anger, but clarity. The kind you get when you finally wipe a mirror clean and see what's actually been staring back all along. I didn't linger. I didn't wait to see who'd comment next, or if the likes would stall. I set my phone face down on the counter, took the mug, and walked outside. The morning was bright. The kind of quiet suburban brightness that made you forget that people lied, that vows unraveled, that soft betrayals wore hashtags now. I turned the garden hose toward the rose bushes, letting the water run slow and even. The soil drank it up without protest. I thought of 17 years. The anniversaries, the vacations, the burnt Thanksgiving turkey we laughed about for months. The first time she kissed my wrist instead of my lips. The way she cried when her mother died and clung to me like I was the last unshakable thing in her world. Then I thought of how she leaned into Trent like he was home. The water pooled under the grass, soaking the roots. A few neighborhood kids rode by on bikes, their laughter echoing faintly like it came from another planet. I kept watering. My hand steady. My heart even. I didn't need to rehearse what I'd say when she got home. I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't demand an explanation she'd twist into apology-shaped lies. I wouldn't beg for something she'd already given to someone else in boardrooms and bar lounges. No, I would keep watering the lawn. Let the world do what it does. Let her scroll through her notifications, smiling at hearts and thumbs up until she saw mine. Until she realized what I'd done. What I'd known. What I had waited to confirm. There would be no shouting match. No scene on the porch. Just the sound of her key not quite fitting in the lock she assumed she still owned. I adjusted the hose nozzle, making the stream gentler for the lilies. Her lilies. She always loved those. Bought them every April for the kitchen table. I almost laughed. Almost. Inside, the coffee cooled. The folder waited. And me? I stood in the sun, robe fluttering a little in the breeze, hand firm on the hose. I wasn't broken. I wasn't even bitter. I was awake. Finally. That morning, she lost a husband. But I gained clarity. The call came around 7:42 p.m. I remember the exact time because I was halfway through organizing my tax files, something I'd been putting off for months. The soft hum of the ceiling fan circled above me. A jazz playlist played low from my laptop speaker. Calm, still, methodical. Then her name lit up the screen, Maribel. I watched it ring twice. 3 times. I didn't feel heat in my chest. Just a hollow curiosity, like someone peering into a window of a life that didn't belong to them anymore. I let it ring once more before answering. "Hey," she said, drawing out the word like sugar on her tongue. I could hear her smiling through the line, that high-pitched cheeriness she used when she knew she was already in the wrong but wanted to disarm you first. "You're not really mad, are you?" she continued before I could even answer. "I mean, come on, babe. It was a joke. Everyone does that stuff on Facebook. It's harmless." There it was. The shift. The manipulation wrapped in feigned innocence. I didn't speak. I just listened, leaning back in the chair, letting her talk. Her words tumbled out quickly, too quickly, like someone hurrying past a crime scene they caused. "I mean, you know how people post stuff like that. It's just office humor. Trent's like, he's like a brother. You know how close our whole team is. People thought it was funny." She gave a nervous little laugh that scratched at the edge of desperation. "Honestly, I think you're overreacting." I could almost picture her, pacing somewhere, maybe outside the hotel, maybe in her rental car, biting a thumbnail and checking her reflection in the rearview mirror every few seconds. Still dressed from whatever conference mixer she had been to, still running the script in her head like a PR professional trying to reframe a scandal. And you know how social media is, people blow things out of proportion. I didn't even think before I posted. Trent said something funny and, ugh, I shouldn't have tagged him. That's what you're upset about, right? I let a full beat pass. Long enough for her to fill it if she wanted to. She didn't. That alone told me she was waiting for a lifeline. I finally said, evenly, "Check the kitchen." The silence on her end was a different kind of loud. I imagined her blinking, confused, thinking maybe I was making a joke. That I was going to say something flippant next. That she could still talk her way through this. Over it. Around it. "What?" she said, her voice lighter, a little higher. "What do you mean?" I repeated it, calmly. "Check the kitchen." Another pause. Then came the brittle laugh. "Wait, you're joking, right? Silas? You didn't actually. Come on, don't be dramatic." She was unraveling, just a little. Her voice cracked at the end of the sentence, though she tried to keep the lilt of control. I could hear her mind flipping through options, trying to land on the one that would steer this conversation towards safety. I didn't respond. I just leaned forward and ended the call. She tried calling back immediately. I declined it without hesitation. My phone buzzed again and again. Then a message popped up. "Silas, seriously, don't do this. It's not what you think. Can we just talk?" Another buzz. "I'm coming home Monday. We can talk then, okay?" I turned my phone off completely. I stared at the wall for a long moment after that. Not out of regret, not even satisfaction. Just observation. Like I'd stepped outside of time and was now watching the ending of a long play I'd accidentally starred in. The final act was unfolding, the curtains drawing closed, slowly, methodically, like velvet sliding over an old truth. I thought about the look she'd have on her face when she walked into the kitchen and saw the beige folder. How her fingers would hover over it before opening the flap. How her eyes would scan the papers, the asset inventory, the division agreement, the signature lines. How the air might rush out of her chest not from shock, but from recognition. Because somewhere deep down, she had to know this was coming. Not because of one photo, not because of a hashtag, but because somewhere along the way, she stopped treating me like someone who mattered. And I had finally started acting accordingly. Outside, the sprinklers kicked on again. The rhythmic tick-tick-tick of water arcing across the yard filled the air. I poured myself another glass of water, slid open the back door, and stepped onto the patio. The sky was darkening, stars just beginning to peek out from behind the purple wash of evening. I sat down in the chair I'd refinished last summer. She had never really liked it, said it looked too rustic. I always thought it was honest. I thought of her scrolling through her feed again and again, deleting comments, maybe messaging Trent in a panic, wondering what people would think, wondering if they'd connect the dots. But mostly, I wondered if she'd understand that this wasn't some heat-of-the-moment decision. This was time catching up. This was consequence with a filing tab. This was clarity in Manila. No raised voice. No broken plates. Just a sentence, 5 words, that told her everything she needed to know. Check the kitchen. Monday morning felt unnaturally still. The kind of stillness that comes right before a controlled demolition, when the charges are set, the area cleared, and all that's left is waiting for someone to push the button. I didn't sleep much the night before. Not because I was conflicted, but because I was methodical. I'd laid everything out: timeline, documentation, evidence. I wasn't pacing or second-guessing. I was editing, cleaning up a mess someone else made with smiles and hashtags. And I knew exactly where to start. Durant and Voss had a strict code of conduct. I knew that because Maribel used to quote it when bragging about how professional her team was. They had monthly compliance meetings, annual refreshers, zero tolerance for anything that even looked like favoritism between superiors and their direct reports. And Trent? He reported directly to her. She was his evaluation officer. She signed off on his travel, his bonus justifications, even his training approvals. And yet there she was, smiling into his shoulder like the end credits were rolling on their Hallmark movie romance. So I typed slowly, carefully, clean subject line, conduct concern, Durant and Voss conference. I didn't use her name in the body. Not right away. I structured it the way an internal whistleblower would. Detached, measured, impersonal. Just a concerned party bringing potential misconduct to light. Please see attached. The enclosed screenshot contains a social media post shared publicly by a Durant and Voss employee during the firm's recent regional sales retreat. Given the visible familiarity between a supervisor and her direct report and the language used, this may present a violation of company policy regarding manager-subordinate boundaries. The photo was timestamped during company-funded travel hours. No signature, no email address linked to me. I used a secure, anonymous Dropbox plugin from an old burner account I once used to report a payroll glitch at my own job. The attachment: a clean screenshot of the Facebook post with the caption and timestamp visible. No extra commentary, just the facts. I stared at the screen for one final second. Then I hit send. The moment I did, a strange calm settled over me. It wasn't vindictive. I didn't want to see her burn. I just wanted things to be what they were. Truth exposed. Consequences invited. I wasn't going to scream into a void while she laughed in boardrooms and typed winking emojis into Slack threads. By early afternoon, the post was gone. I hadn't saved the screenshot to just one folder. I had backups. Cloud, Drive, offline USB. But the deletion told me all I needed to know. She'd been tipped off. Or worse, someone from inside had already reached out to her. That's when Jude messaged. Jude wasn't just a friend. He was the kind of friend you keep from high school because life keeps throwing you into the same orbit. We used to call him Firewall because back in senior year, he figured out how to spoof the school's internet filter and stream games on classroom monitors. Now, he worked in the IT department at Durant and Voss. He didn't talk much about work, and I never asked. But we played cards once a month, traded memes, checked in after holidays. I hadn't even told him about the Facebook post yet. His text came through like lightning cutting the sky. HR just flagged her. I stared at those words for a beat. I read them again. Then again. He followed up, your wife. Maribel. That post must have triggered an alert or something. I'm not in HR, but Celia just asked for her entire work laptop session history from the conference weekend. She didn't look happy. I didn't reply right away. Not because I was shocked, but because it was actually happening. The charges were set. And now someone was pacing toward the button. Later, over the phone, Jude told me more. They're pulling chat logs, calendar entries, the shuttle manifest. Apparently, other employees had already complained that she and Trent kept disappearing during the trip. And someone mentioned that they requested a shared Uber for an off-site dinner on the company card. I closed my eyes and let the words wash over me. So they're taking it seriously? I asked. Oh yeah, he said, with a whistle. Celia's got that HR tone. You know the one. All polite fury and surgical calm. She's building a file. I've seen her do it before. When she gets quiet, someone's career is about to evaporate. I didn't smile, didn't gloat, but I did stare out the window for a long time after that call. Watching the breeze ripple across the lawn I watered 2 days ago. The grass had bounced back quickly, resilient, like it didn't even remember what had been poured into its soil. By evening, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Maribel. Hey, weird thing. Did you see someone reported my Facebook post to HR? It's not a big deal, but it's just annoying. HR asked a bunch of questions. Like, really dumb ones. Did you see it? She was testing the water. fishing for information with a hook wrapped in casualness. I didn't respond. Then came another message. Seriously though, who would do that? It's just a dumb joke. Now Harlan's all serious about policy optics. Like, come on. Optics. She always did love that word. The illusion of order, the surface image of things being fine. As long as it looked okay, the truth could be distorted, postponed, filtered. But truth doesn't need an audience. It just needs a moment. And hers was already unfolding behind boardroom doors. There's a moment when the shift happens, not with noise, but with stillness. That was the space I was in when I opened my laptop Monday night, logged into my financial accounts, and began moving with precision. Maribel was still playing a game of charm and spin with HR, pretending her photo was a harmless joke. I was playing chess. This wasn't about rage. Rage is messy, loud, unreliable. This was about calculation, about preparing a clean landing for my future self, the one who wouldn't have to share space, time, or name with someone who called another man her real partner. I poured myself a glass of water, sat at the dining table, and clicked through tabs. Our accounts were linked, at least the ones she knew about. But what she didn't realize was that I'd opened a private trust fund 3 months ago. Originally, it was meant as a backup, a safety net. Now, it was a lifeboat. I started small. I transferred my personal savings quietly and in chunks under reportable thresholds. Then came the brokerage account. I'd funded most of it over the years, using end-of-year bonuses and tax returns while she focused on retail therapy and curated girls' trips to Aspen. One by one, I untied knots. The next move was the life insurance. I navigated through the portal, updated my beneficiary. Her name disappeared from the document with one click, replaced by my sister Lorna, a woman who never liked Maribel but stayed respectful for my sake. I didn't call Lorna to tell her. She wouldn't gloat. She'd simply nod and say, "About damn time." Then came the credit cards. I didn't cancel hers. That would have sparked drama. Instead, I reduced the credit limit to a modest figure, just enough for gas, groceries, and necessities. No more surprise spa weekends or charges at overpriced boutiques she only went to for the Instagram aesthetic. No alert, no notice, no call from the bank. Just a quiet tightening of the tap. Next, the shared checking account. That one took more finesse. I left enough for the mortgage autopay, utilities, and her standard grocery runs. Just enough to seem normal, but not enough to build any new castles. The rest, my portion, my earnings, moved elsewhere. I looked over the numbers like a general scanning a battlefield. Everything was accounted for. Nothing left behind. And it was all done without a word. No raised voices. No accusations. Just math. A new text lit up my phone as I was logging out of the final portal. From her. "Maribel, we should talk." Short. Careful. Calculated. Maybe. I stared at it for a moment before flipping the phone screen down on the table like it had interrupted a symphony. We should talk. That's what people say when they want to rewrite the scene after the damage is done. But I wasn't interested in rewrites. I was finalizing the chapter. She didn't get a reply. I went to the hall closet, pulled down the filing box labeled important, and opened the beige divorce folder again. It was all there. Asset listings, legal separation documents, statements of intent, custody waiver, no kids, thankfully. The papers were reviewed, notarized, and quietly waiting for the moment I decided to make them real. I thumbed through each page, checking that every number lined up. This wasn't about drama. This was about order. I didn't want chaos. I wanted closure. In the upstairs office, I packed away the last remnants of our joint life, framed photos, a couple of her business plaques that once hung on. After that, I moved through the house with intention. I wasn't just cleaning. I was rebalancing. The guest bedroom, once just a room we offered to friends or family, had been quietly prepped. Her things, what I hadn't already boxed, were neatly arranged. Shoes, toiletries, the stack of novels she never finished, and her favorite navy robe. The beige folder sat right on the guest bed, open to the signature page. I'd already signed mine. This wasn't punishment. This was design. By the time I finished, it was close to midnight. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen, the refrigerator humming like a tired engine, the clock ticking with deliberate certainty. We'd built a life in this house. Chosen tiles, argued over cabinet colors, painted walls on rainy Saturdays. I didn't hate those memories. I just understood now that they weren't enough to hold together a life being slowly hollowed out from underneath. I remembered the way she once looked at me when we signed the mortgage paperwork. Hopeful, trusting. That woman? She was long gone, replaced by someone who called her subordinate her real partner and still expected me to play the supportive husband while she curated her own narrative. So I left the house exactly the way she remembered it, tidy, calm, welcoming. Only, she didn't live here anymore. Not really. The version of me who tolerated half-truths and excuses? He'd been buried beneath her hashtags. This version? He understood execution. Quiet. Intentional. Final. And I was done talking. Tuesday morning began like any other for them, anyway. For Maribel, it probably started with hair curled, heels snapped on, and a forced smile aimed at her reflection. She was good at that, the illusion. The projection. I could imagine her brushing off whatever conversation HR had initiated the day before with a quick joke or a dismissive shrug. She always had a pivot in her pocket. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have anticipated, was that the very foundation beneath her had already begun to crack. Because unlike the curated version of her life she posted online, real-world structures tend to buckle when you forget integrity is part of the build. Around mid-morning, my phone lit up. It was Jude. Just his name flashing on the screen was enough to make me pause mid-sip from my coffee. I answered, walking out onto the porch, my tone calm. Controlled. "Talk to me," I said. Jude didn't waste time. You should have seen Harlan's face. My lips twitched at the edge, but I didn't smile. Not yet. He called me into the server room this morning, Jude continued. Said he needed the security logs from the conference hotel. Room numbers. Shuttle check-ins. Time-stamped card keys. He didn't say why at first, but I could tell something was under his skin. Then he showed me the post. There was a beat of silence between us. He had no idea? I asked, though I already knew the answer. None. None, man. He looked like someone kicked him in the stomach. Said, "She's my senior account manager. She oversees 6 regions." Then just sat down and stared at the photo for like 20 seconds straight. I pictured it. Harlan, the type of boss who probably prided himself on running a clean ship, a man who trusted people like Maribel to carry the flag forward. Only to realize she wasn't carrying it, she was dragging it through the mud in front of her whole team. She and Trent were sharing a hotel room? I asked, already knowing the answer. Jude exhaled sharply. Yup. I didn't tell Harlan that HR already had it. One of the associates said they'd seen her come out of Trent's room at 7 a.m. wearing his jacket. Another said they ordered drinks on the same company tab late Saturday night, like 11 p.m., just the two of them. Whole team saw it. So it wasn't just a slip. It wasn't just a photo. It was a pattern. A visible, traceable breach. And people had noticed. They lit the whole building on fire, Jude added. You just handed HR the matches. I didn't say anything right away. I leaned on the porch railing, watching the wind rustle through the hedges I'd trimmed the day before. The neighborhood felt as quiet as I needed it to be, still and balanced. You're sure Harlan's taking it seriously? I finally asked. Oh, he's past serious. I overheard him in Celia's office. He said, if I sign off on this, I'm complicit. Then something about how they have a new contract going to the board next month, and he's not risking it blowing up because 2 employees played house on company time. A quiet pulse of something moved through me, not pride, not satisfaction, just validation. Like the universe had finally handed back what it owed me, stamped and notarized. I think you broke something big, Jude said after a pause. Not just her rep. She was a finalist for a division lead role, Silas. Like global ops, this was her year. Was. I closed my eyes for a moment, not to gloat, just to breathe in the reality of what was no longer hidden. She did it to herself, I said quietly. Yeah, but you handed them the flashlight. After we hung up, I stayed on the porch for a while longer. Let the truth settle. Let it anchor me. Maribel had always walked a tightrope of charm and control, believing she could recalibrate any narrative with a grin and a glass of Chardonnay. But she never accounted for consequences. Not real ones. Not the kind you can't untag or delete. Later that day, I checked her social media again. The account was still up, but it had gone silent. No new posts. No comments. And the photo that started it all? Scrubbed. Not just deleted, scrubbed. Like someone had gone in and wiped it from the archive. But digital footprints don't disappear just because you panic. HR had what they needed. And now her boss did too. I wondered if she still thought this was just a bad PR day. If she believed she could show up with another rehearsed line and smirk her way back into good standing. That had always been her trick, rebranding the problem without ever resolving it. But corporate structure doesn't care about charm when money, liability, and public image are on the line. That evening, she didn't call. I expected she might, but nothing came through. Maybe she was busy spinning stories. Maybe she was sitting in a conference room with a silent panel and a printout of her own words on the table in front of her. Or maybe, for the first time, she was sitting in silence, staring down the reality that some decisions don't get a second draft. Let her feel it. Let her sit with the ripple of her own choices. This wasn't about revenge. This was the weight of accountability, and it had finally found its target. She came back 2 days earlier than scheduled. I heard the Uber pull into the driveway around 4:15 p.m. The tires crunching against the gravel, the low sound of the trunk opening. I was in the sunroom, sipping green tea, watching the light bend through the glass like nothing in the world was about to shift. But I knew. I knew from the second that car stopped who it was. How she'd walk up the steps, what face she'd put on, how her heels would click like punctuation on an unwelcome sentence. The driver helped her unload one roller bag and a smaller carry-on. She didn't look up at the window. Probably assumed I was inside, watching TV or pacing, waiting for her like a man desperate for closure. But I wasn't pacing. I was anchored. She tried the front door first. I heard the rattle of the knob, the telltale metallic thud when it refused to turn. Then silence. I didn't get up. I waited. A second later, the doorbell rang. Once. Then again, more insistent. Then a pause, like she was choosing her opening line. I walked to the front door, calm, measured. When I opened it, she was standing there with that perfectly constructed face, half apology, half disbelief, mascara still flawless, hair curled like she thought the right presentation might take the edge off what she'd done. "You changed the locks," she said, one eyebrow arched. I looked at her. Not through her. Not around her. Just directly, quietly, fully. "No," I said. "I changed the future." Her expression cracked for half a second, just a twitch at the corner of her mouth. She recovered quickly, tried to laugh, but it came out tight. "Come on, Silas," she said, gesturing vaguely to the door. "Let's just talk inside. This is ridiculous." It was one post. It was a choice, I cut in. Not just one. A series. She blinked at me, lips parting like she had something to say but couldn't quite find the spin. She looked past me into the house, eyes scanning for evidence of what had changed. She must have noticed the missing photos by the stairway, the absence of her shoes by the coat rack. I stepped aside, but not for the front door. I nodded toward the side of the house. "The guest house is open. Your things are there." She turned her head slowly, like she didn't quite believe me. "I boxed up what mattered," I added. "Labeled everything. You'll find the beige folder on the bed. Asset division. Already signed on my end." Maribel's jaw clenched. She didn't scream. She didn't curse. That would have been too raw, too unrehearsed. Instead, she gave me this look, part wounded pride, part calculation, as if she were waiting for me to realize I'd made a mistake and beg her back inside. But I didn't flinch. I didn't fill the silence with comfort. She finally stepped off the porch, walked down the side path slowly, heels clicking softer now, muted by the gravel. I didn't follow. I just watched her disappear toward the small cottage we once called the Overflow when her mother came to visit. The guest house had been cleaned, aired out, and furnished with nothing more than what she'd need. Her clothes, her skincare bottles, the 3 novels she kept by the bed. I even included the ceramic mug she always reached for, the one with the chip on the rim that she refused to throw out. Not out of sentiment, just habit. On the bed, I placed the folder. Clean, neat, with a pin beside it. It wasn't just about logistics. It was symbolism. This wasn't her home anymore. It was her landing pad. Temporary. Conditional. Like the grace I was offering. She didn't come back out that evening. I imagine she sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, flipping through the folder, running her hand over the numbers and allocations, trying to measure loss like a spreadsheet, trying to see if she could reframe this, salvage it. But the terms were clear. Split assets. No alimony. Separate accounts. A clean, bloodless extraction. Later, I made dinner. Just for me. Stir-fried vegetables and jasmine rice. Something simple. I ate at the kitchen island, alone. Peaceful. For years, we'd done that thing couples do. Dancing around problems with routines. We had Tuesday takeout nights, Saturday errands, and the Sunday recharge ritual where she'd put on a face mask and scroll TikTok for hours while I read or mowed the lawn. But behind all that structure was distance, slowly layered until I couldn't see the foundation anymore. That night, as the guest house lights turned off one by one, I sat on the porch in the dark, letting the night breeze brush against my face. She'd walked into the fire herself. I just made sure she couldn't drag me into it with her. I knew the exact time her meeting started, 9 a.m. sharp. HR didn't play with lateness, especially not when the room was already humming with consequences. Durant and Voss had an entire floor dedicated to compliance, but when things turned serious, they reserved conference room 2B. That room had no windows, just one polished table, always too cold, surrounded by chairs that somehow made everyone feel either too small or too exposed. That's where she was headed, dressed in cream and navy, like she was walking into a boardroom pitch, not a reckoning. She wore her war paint well. That blouse was one I'd seen her iron on promotion days. That watch was the gift I'd bought her during our 9th anniversary trip to Charleston, the one she said made her feel executive. She had always known how to frame herself for optics. Even now, as she entered the building, I imagined her posture, back straight, lips set in professional calm, heels clicking a measured beat of control. But inside that room, she wasn't in control anymore. Mr. Harland was already seated when she walked in, flanked by Celia from HR and a corporate attorney named Gina Markham. The tone was set before a word was spoken. The screen behind them displayed a folder labeled Internal Conduct Review, Maribel Merrick. Not allegation, not discussion. Review, the kind of language that means decisions are already halfway made. I wasn't there, of course, but Jude was. Not in the room, but close. He had his ear to the hallway, working quietly, eyes down, pretending to organize AV cables while he listened through the open sliver of the door. She tried to lead. Jude told me over the phone later. Sat down and smiled. Asked if this was going to be quick. Harland didn't even respond. He didn't have to. Celia opened a manila folder and began laying out the timeline. First, the Facebook post. There it was, printed in color, the image of her tucked in close to Trent, the hashtag Workisband for life. Hashtag still painfully visible underneath. She leaned forward, tried to explain it away as a joke, an inside team thing. It wasn't meant literally, she said. It's office culture. Everyone uses that phrase. I didn't think it would be taken seriously, but Celia was ready. She pulled out another printout. Internal text messages from the company phone system, Trent and Maribel exchanging emojis and phrases that were unmistakably personal. One of them included a line from Maribel, "Can't wait for tonight, same room as last time, winky face." Then came the travel receipts. 2 company-paid dinners at restaurants off-site from the hotel venue, both for 2 people, both billed to her corporate card. Dates and times matched perfectly with Trent's card key entries from the hotel room logs. He'd entered room 612, hers, at 10:48 p.m. and didn't badge out until 7:21 the next morning. She tried to pivot, Jude told me, his voice low, almost apologetic. Said it was late, that he had missed his shuttle, that they worked late and just crashed after watching TV. But Gina, the corporate attorney, didn't blink. She slid across a photo that had been taken at the bar, the same one from Facebook, different angle. This time, someone from the team had captured them holding hands under the table. A blurred image, but unmistakable. Maribel froze. She knew then. I could feel it from a distance. The moment she realized she was no longer in a meeting. She was in a tribunal. Harland finally spoke. Jude said his voice was even, exhausted more than angry. "You're not being investigated for poor judgment," he said. "You're being reviewed for a violation of ethical conduct, breach of leadership standards, and financial misuse of company funds. This is not about perception. This is about your actions." She reached, apparently, for one last card. She claimed it was consensual, private, outside of company hours. That they were adults. That's when Celia brought up the power dynamic. Durant and Voss's Code of Leadership Ethics, Section 7. Managers are explicitly prohibited from engaging in romantic or sexual relationships with direct reports, regardless of consent, if one party holds evaluative or disciplinary authority over the other. Trent was her direct report. She had signed his quarterly reviews. She had approved his travel, bonuses, and training certifications. She had failed to disclose any change in their relationship status, failed to recuse herself from decisions regarding him, failed to notify HR of potential conflict of interest, all while billing dinners, drinks, and shared transportation to the company. At that point, she stopped defending. Just sat there, according to Jude, quietly blinking as the reality settled. She didn't cry, Jit said. Didn't yell. Just nodded like someone who finally saw the wall they'd been running toward for months. By the end of the meeting, Harlan didn't even ask for a rebuttal. He stood, said that further internal communication would be handled by HR and legal, and walked out without shaking her hand. Celia slid an envelope across the table, an interim administrative leave order, effective immediately. Her badge was disabled within minutes. Her work laptop access terminated. Email suspended. She was to surrender all company property within 24 hours. No farewell emails. No wrap-up calls. Just erasure. By the time Jude finished telling me everything, I was standing in the garage, hands still dusty from reshelving old paint cans. I hadn't moved. Just listened, letting it all settle in the space between who she used to be and who she'd just become. I didn't feel triumphant. I wasn't punching the air or toasting to her downfall. But I felt something settle in my chest, like justice, maybe. Or balance. Like watching gravity do what it does without interference. You drop a stone, and it falls. You betray trust, and eventually, truth calls the meeting. That afternoon, I saw her car pull up to the guest house. She didn't storm in. She didn't knock. She just sat in the car for a long while. I could see her through the blinds, gripping the wheel, unmoving. Finally, she got out, walked slowly to the side door. Her cream blouse wilted in the summer heat, her navy heels now scuffed with reality. I didn't go out to meet her. I stayed inside. Because her real meeting wasn't in that boardroom. It was in the aftermath. She didn't knock this time. Didn't bother with the doorbell either. She let herself in through the side entry of the main house like she still lived here, like nothing had changed. I was in the den, the old wingback chair beside the fireplace cradling me like it had every quiet evening before she turned our life into spectacle. My tea, untouched, rested on the armrest, steam curling lazily into the stillness. Then came the sound of the door swinging open, brisk heels on hardwood, and her voice. Sharp, breathless, cut through with disbelief. You sabotaged me. Not a greeting, not a question. Just an accusation hurled like she had every right to hurl it. I didn't respond. Didn't turn my head. I reached for the tea and took a sip, the ceramic warm against my hand, steadying me. I know it was you, she continued, stepping further in. The HR email. The timing. You did this to ruin me. I lowered the cup gently onto the side table and folded my hands in my lap. She stood in the doorway now, arms crossed tightly over her cream blouse like she was bracing against a storm that she started. You're quiet now? Just going to sit there and pretend you didn't nuke my job, my reputation, everything? Still, I didn't speak. I had prepared for this moment. Not with words, but with distance. With insulation. You don't give a fire more oxygen when the damage is done. You seal the space, let the embers die on their own. You think this makes you noble? She sneered. You think because I made one mistake, you get to burn everything down? I turned my head slowly, looked at her, not with anger, not even disappointment, just that heavy clarity that arrives when someone finally reveals who they really are. One, I said, voice calm. One mistake. She scoffed. Oh, don't do that. Don't start tallying things up like you were some flawless husband. You were boring, Silas. Predictable. I needed more. I nodded once, slowly. Not in agreement, just in recognition. That was it, TH. Instead, I reached beside me and picked up a small, rectangular device from the side table. I pressed play. Her voice echoed through the room. Her exact words from 30 seconds ago, sharp and crystalline. You sabotaged me. I know it was you. You did this to ruin me. The recording stopped. She froze. Her eyes narrowed. You're recording me now? Please route all communication through legal counsel. I said. It wasn't just a line. It was a declaration. A wall she couldn't scale anymore. She blinked, stunned. The color in her face drained just slightly, like she wasn't expecting to be met with policy instead of emotion. Like she came ready for a sparring match, but found herself punching fog. Her eyes drifted past me, toward the hallway. That's when she saw the envelope on the entry table, the one marked confidential, HR correspondence. Her gaze locked onto it like prey to a trap, but she didn't move. You don't have to do this, she said, a note of desperation creeping in now. We can figure it out. It was just... No, I cut in gently. You already figured it out. Every choice you made, every caption you posted, every ride you shared with him. You figured out what mattered. Now I'm just honoring it. She took a step forward, then stopped. I'm still your wife, she said. You were I corrected. But this house doesn't hold that title anymore. And neither do I. She didn't cry. I half expected tears. I think part of her did too. That maybe she could trigger some remaining flicker of pity. But I was too far removed. Not hardened. Just done. I gave everything to this life, she said, voice breaking. 17 years. And you gave the end of it to someone else, I replied. She stepped back slowly, breathing shallow. Her hands fell from her chest to her sides like they no longer knew what to hold. Then she said something that would have gutted me years ago. Maybe even months ago. I don't have anyone left. There it was. The quiet horror. Not that I had responded, not that I'd exposed her, but that her safety net, the story she told herself about control and options, had snapped. She had thought Trent was an upgrade, a rush, a midlife spark. But HR didn't side with sparks. Her boss had gone silent. Her subordinates had turned into witnesses. And now, even I, the last piece in the old foundation, was stepping back. She turned slowly and walked toward the door. Not defeated, just weightless, like a person who realized the map she was following led to nowhere. I waited until the door clicked shut behind her. Then I rose, walked to the table, and picked up the envelope. Inside were copies of the HR memos Jude had slipped me, indirectly, through encrypted files. I'd never open them again. I didn't need to. I already knew what they said. She was radioactive now. Not just inside the company, but to anyone tied to it. No recommendations. No quiet transfers. Just distance. I went back to the den, picked up my tea, now lukewarm, and sipped. This wasn't revenge. It was restraint. Because if I'd wanted revenge, I would have posted the emails, the bar tab photo, the text about the room key, publicly. I would have tagged her in a carefully worded goodbye letter on LinkedIn. I would have emailed every person she tried to climb past in the company. But I didn't. I let the silence do the work. Sometimes the most devastating thing you can offer someone who's built their life on attention is none. The courtroom wasn't large. It wasn't dramatic or cinematic, no marble columns or echoing gavels. Just rows of oak benches, a modest judge's bench raised slightly, and the dull murmur of legal proceedings being recorded by a stenographer whose face never moved. Still, it carried a weight. The kind that settled into your ribs and pressed down gently, reminding you that this was real. Final. Public. I wore a charcoal suit. Simple. Not flashy. Just the kind of thing a man wears when he knows he doesn't need to impress. Only to present truth with clean hands. Maribel sat across the aisle, flanked by her attorney, Ben Caraway. He couldn't have been more than 30, maybe 32 if you squinted hard enough. His briefcase looked borrowed. His tie was knotted too tight. Maribel had downgraded from the high-profile litigator she once hinted at hiring. Maybe because she thought it would be an easy split. Maybe because her reputation had already cost her too much. She didn't look at me, not directly. Her eyes flickered in my direction once, when I entered, but then she busied herself with flipping through papers that didn't need flipping. Her lips were tight. Her expression unreadable. Not remorseful. Not hostile. Just blank. The expression of someone trying to pretend they were somewhere else. The bailiff called our names, and we rose. Case number 19, CV 0870. Merrick versus Merrick. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Judge Margot Tallis presided. An older woman with short silver hair and clear disdain for theatrics. I liked her instantly. She didn't look for emotion. She looked for documentation, for evidence, for precision. Marcus, my attorney, stood with the calm of someone who didn't need to bluster to be right. He was everything Ben wasn't: measured, concise, unimpressed by distractions. Your Honor, Marcus began, this case is straightforward. We're not contesting custody, as there are no children. We are not contesting prenuptial agreements because there are none. What we are presenting is a clear case for financial division, based on marital misconduct that directly impacted shared resources, professional reputation, and contractual trust. Ben shifted awkwardly beside Maribel, cleared his throat. We would like to raise the issue of emotional equity, he said. Mrs. Merrick contributed significantly to the emotional and professional support of Mr. Merrick over their 17-year marriage. Her actions, while regrettable, should not nullify her claim to a fair distribution of assets, including potential alimony. Judge Tallis didn't blink. Do you have evidence of Mr. Merrick's financial dependency on your client? Well, not dependency, Your Honor. But an emotional investment should hold weight. After all, 17 years. Marcus stepped forward. We do have evidence, Your Honor. Not of dependency, but of breach. A documented HR investigation at Durant and Voss, where Mrs. Merrick was employed as a regional manager. The investigation concluded that she engaged in a workplace relationship with her direct subordinate, Trent Holloway. This relationship, undisclosed and overlapping with business travel, resulted in a policy violation that led to her termination. Judge Tallis turned to Ben. "Is this accurate?" Ben hesitated. Maribel didn't even lift her head. Finally, Ben replied, "There was a separation from the company. Yes. The investigation." "So we're not disputing costs," the judge said. "Continue, Mr. Davis." Marcus nodded. "We have internal documentation, timestamps, expense reports, and digital correspondence confirming Mrs. Merrick's behavior. There's no request for punitive damages. We're simply requesting a fair division based on the facts." I sat still as the documents were submitted, as photos were handed to the clerk, as screenshots and financial ledgers moved across the judge's desk like a quiet storm. Maribel didn't flinch, but she didn't speak, either. Her lawyer kept shifting, trying to soften the language, but you can't soften facts once they're signed in black and white. Judge Tallis reviewed the folder for what felt like forever, then removed her reading glasses and folded her hands. "Given the nature of the dissolution and the documentation presented, I see no grounds to support an alimony award. The property settlement appears fair. Mr. Merrick retains the primary residence, vehicle, and 60% of shared financial assets. The remaining 40% will be deposited into a separate account for Mrs. Merrick upon finalization. Additionally, Mr. Merrick's life insurance policy and trust funds have already been legally redirected, and no reversal is warranted." Ben tried to object, his voice raised slightly. "Your Honor, if I may." "No, Mr. Carraway. You may not," she said, her tone sharp and absolute. "You had every opportunity to contest these claims with counter-evidence. You brought sentiment to a documentation hearing. This court operates on facts." That was the moment I looked at Maribel, not out of vengeance or victory, but because it was the last time I would see her in a room with my name still attached to hers. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She just stared at the table, not with sadness, with stillness. The kind of stillness that comes when a door finally closes behind you and there's no knob on your side. The judge signed the dissolution papers with a firm stroke. "This marriage is legally dissolved." Next case. Just like that, we were unbound. I stood, thanked Marcus, and walked past her without a word. Not to be cruel, just to preserve the silence we both deserved. Because sometimes, the loudest thing you can say is nothing at all. The rose bushes were coming in strong that morning. I trimmed them with quiet focus, pruning dead heads with each snip, not out of anger, but routine. There was something satisfying about it, methodical, restorative. The sun had just crested over the neighbor's roof, slanting soft gold across the yard. Birds chirped high above like they hadn't read any of the emails, like they didn't care about inboxes or broken vows. I liked that about them. Somewhere behind me, the guest house door creaked open. I didn't turn around. I could feel her standing there. Maribel, watching me through the screened porch. She hadn't spoken to me since the hearing. No knocks, no apologies, just long silences and short footsteps that started and stopped behind walls we no longer shared. At one point, she'd left a note in the mailbox, just one folded line. "Can we talk?" I never opened it. I didn't need to. I already knew every version of the conversation she was capable of offering, and none of them came with truth she hadn't already buried under a caption and a lie. That morning, I knew she was waiting on something. Had been for days. She hadn't said it, but I saw her laptop open on the kitchen island when I passed by the other day. Her phone was glued to her palm like oxygen. Notifications buzzed constantly, emails, alerts, maybe group chats where people were too polite to ask what really happened, or too afraid to be seen caring. But today, she was waiting on one email. One that would come with a decision sealed in corporate font and sterile phrasing. One final message from Durant and Voss. And I knew when it came she'd scream. It happened just after 11. I didn't hear the notification chime, but I didn't have to. The scream started low, a choked sound, the kind that belongs to someone who still believes there's time to undo what they've done. Then it rose, sharper, wilder. It wasn't dramatic. It was final. I stood by the rose bush, still holding the pruning shears in my gloved hand, the warm air brushing past me like nothing had happened. I didn't look up. I heard her voice through the screen door. No, 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 no. She stumbled into the yard, barefoot, still in the silk robe she'd worn like armor all week. Her hair was tangled from sleep, or maybe from tossing and turning through every minute of silence I'd gifted her. She had her phone in her hand, gripped so tight her knuckles were white. She was crying now, but the kind of crying that sounds like disbelief, like betrayal from a ghost she thought she could control. I let her speak first. They fired me. She stood at the edge of the lawn, not crossing it, not coming closer, as if the grass marked some sacred boundary now. I clipped one final bud and turned toward her. They let me go. No severance. No option to reapply. They said my behavior reflected poorly on the company and my judgment undermined the leadership structure. I said nothing. It was one mistake, she whispered. I turned fully to face her now, gloves still on, shears dangling at my side like a forgotten weapon. No, I said. It wasn't one. Her lip quivered, but I didn't feel pity. I felt clarity. Because that's what time gives you when you stop chasing closure from the person who fractured you. You're happy, she said, accusingly. You're just standing there like this is what you wanted. No, I said again, quieter this time. I just made peace with the truth before you did. She looked down at her phone, hands trembling now. I gave them everything. No, I corrected. You gave them the version of you that served you best. Until it didn't. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of the roses between us like an invisible line. You don't know what it's like, she said, to fall that fast. To have people look at you like you're poison. I do, I said. You just didn't notice. Because you were the one doing the pushing. She flinched at that, visibly. For a second, I thought she might walk forward, say something softer, something human. But then her spine straightened. Her voice sharpened again. You sent that email. You tipped them off. You planned all of this. Don't act like you're clean. I didn't plan your actions, I said. I just stopped protecting them. She blinked. That landed. And somewhere behind her anger, I saw her realize that everything that happened, the unraveling, the HR folder, the cold goodbye email, wasn't about punishment. It was about exposure. I didn't say anything else. I turned back to the rose bush and clipped another spent bloom. I could feel her watching me, but she didn't speak again. Eventually, I heard the slow steps retreating across the gravel path. The door clicked softly shut behind her. I let the silence expand around me. Later that afternoon, I saw the blinds in the guest house lower. No movement after that. No lights. Like the whole structure had folded in on itself. I made dinner for one that evening, grilled salmon, roasted carrots, and couscous with lemon zest. A soft jazz playlist played in the background, the notes gliding through the kitchen like a gentle affirmation that peace didn't always come with trumpets. Sometimes it just showed up with quiet hands and steady breath. I didn't check her social media, though I knew people would be talking. Durant and Voss wasn't subtle with their firings. Her absence would be obvious by now. The group photo from last quarter's conference, the smiling headshot on the executive page, all erased. Her inbox deactivated. The message would have read something simple. After internal review, your position is no longer tenable. Effective immediately. Thank you for your contributions. Signed, Julian R., Penn CEO. The man she once toasted at an executive retreat. The one who called her visionary in the company newsletter. Now, he was the one who digitally erased her in a single sentence. She must have read it 5 times before she screamed. I imagine she kept checking her spam folder, her LinkedIn, her other inboxes. Maybe she refreshed the Durant and Voss portal like a prayer. But there would be no follow-up. No soft landing. Just that sentence and silence. And me? I sat in the backyard again, tea in hand, as the sun dipped low and the cicadas began to sing. The grass swayed gently in the breeze. The same lawn she once thought was beneath her. The same soil she stepped over without thanks. I had kept watering it while she built castles with borrowed bricks. Now all the noise was gone. No meetings. No calls. No curated smiles or filtered lies. Just stillness. Just breath. Just me. And for the first time in 17 years, I wasn't holding my breath waiting to be seen. I had already found what she never thought I would. Peace.